laughter echoed where sorrow should have reigned, and Nero Wolfe knew it wasn't joy. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. I love hearing from fellow mystery lovers. Tell me where you're watching from today. Your words bring this world to life. Let's begin. There are knocks and there are knocks. The first category is polite, a teacup on china, a cough in a chapel. The second is what we got at 3:57, which sounded like someone had a grievance with oak as a species. It made me grateful the door was short on feelings. I was at my desk in the office, working on the accounts in a posture that would have made a chiropractor snicker. Working on the accounts, in our household lexicon, translates to staring at numbers until they rearrange themselves into surrender. Across from me was the red leather chair that exists for visitors who don't know any better. Mr. Wolfe was upstairs, tucked among the orchids, which had all the personality of royalty and the same demands. Fritz had sworn off interrupting Wolfe's 4 to 6 with any excuse short of the floor catching fire, and even then he'd start by soaking a towel. The knocker tried again. I ignored it on principle. A third salvo arrived determined to batter principle into pulp, so I stuck the pencil into the ledger like a dagger in a loaf and went. I opened the door on a pair. The first was a young woman with a startled look she hadn't yet learned to mothball for public use. 25, give or take an argument. Hair gathered back like she wasn't much for adornment. Hands tight at her sides as if she expected them to chatter if set free. She wore a black dress that aimed at respectable but had been purchased in a hurry from a store with a good memory for numbers and a poor one for fabrics. Behind her, giving the impression he had been born leaning on door frames, was a man who had known better shoes than the ones he currently wore. Tall, narrow shoulders under a decent topcoat, eyes that filed reports without permission. I pegged him for a lawyer before he got his name out. Probably because he wanted me to. "Good afternoon," he said, giving me the kind of smile that comes attached to stationery with a watermark. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm Selby Quinlan, counsel." "Clever of you," I told him, because a lawyer who introduces himself as counsel without being asked deserves a nickel for his nerve. "Come on in. You've got 3 minutes before Mr. Wolfe comes down from his garden, or 3 hours. The orchids never check their watches." The young woman's eyes darted past me like she was checking for traps. "Is he, Mr. Wolfe, very large?" "Enough to discourage ragweed," I said. "You're safe. He moves only on holidays, and then only if the Constitution insists." They stepped in, shedding a little November damp into the foyer. I took them to the office, where Wolfe's empty chair looked like a throne waiting for its occupant to remember the kingdom. The woman sat on the edge of the red leather as if good furniture might take offense. Quinlan took the other chair and tried to claim territory with posture. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "my client, Miss Pilar Mendez, requires discreet counsel regarding a misunderstanding. It occurred at a funeral." Fritz materialized to take coats. He disapproves of umbrellas on principle, and vanished like a moral lesson. I settled behind my desk and put on the expression that suggests I might actually invoice someone before the decade closes. "If it's misunderstanding you want," I said, "you've come to the right lie down. Funerals, though, that's a specialized misunderstanding." "Whose?" "Mrs. Thurza Langdon," Quinlan said, with the respectful lift people reserve for names that make their balance sheets purr. "Of Langen Susanin Textiles. I'll give the man credit. If you intend to throw a net over Nero Wolfe's attention, you don't use string. You use a name that makes newspapers pay overtime. Langen Susanin had dressed and undressed the country for 60 years. Mrs. Thurza Langen had been the monarch of bolts and dividends for 40 of those. She had money that could hire other money to carry its packages. I made a note to smile at Fritz later. The grocery budget had been looking like a dieting pamphlet. "And the misunderstanding?" I asked. Pilar, whose gaze kept doing reconnaissance laps, spoke before her counsel could package the truth in brown paper and twine. I laughed, she said. The word came out small but distinct, like a pebble in a brooch box. At the funeral. I turned to look at her, and she met it as if she had decided, finally, to be brave about something. You laughed, I said accommodatingly. At a funeral. Yes, she said. Not... Her hands flinched. Not like that. It wasn't... I didn't mean... Quinlan inserted himself smoothly. Miss Mendez was until 3 days ago a domestic employee in Mrs. Langan's townhouse. She had been on staff 6 months. The family, in their grief, misinterpreted an involuntary reaction during the service. She was summarily dismissed. He lifted a brow, and accused of other improprieties. Which? I asked. He hesitated, organized words, rejected them. The accusation is untrue, but it is corrosive, and if repeated, it will compromise Miss Mendez's future employment. She seeks exoneration. I glanced at Pilar again. There's a way some people sit in our office. They don't try to sell you the line that everything's fine. They're past that. They want permission to believe they have options. She had that posture. It's not flattering, but it's honest. What exactly were you accused of? I asked her, not the man with the file cabinet mind. Her lips pressed together. She made herself say it. A letter went missing. A letter that Mrs. Langan kept in the top drawer of her desk in the library. After the funeral, Mr. Conrad, that's Mrs. Langan's son, went to look for it. It wasn't there. Mr. Conrad's wife said she'd seen me dusting the week before, and I had opened the drawer. A flush climbed up her neck, a shade the dressmaker would have called claret. They said I took it, and because I laughed, they said it proved I had no respect. What kind of letter? I asked. She rolled her shoulder in a helpless shrug. A personal letter, from someone called S. That's all I know. From upstairs came the faint, ritualistic thud that meant Wolfe was descending from the plant rooms, every step a treaty with gravity. Quinlan heard it and shifted. Pilar sat straighter, as if all the chairs had just realized they were in the presence of a heavier one. Wolfe entered the office, and the temperature rose 2 degrees from the displacement of mass. He nodded at me, at the room, and then took his place with all the ceremony owed to a man and a chair that had an arrangement. In his black suit and mustard-yellow vest, he looked like a warning to the insufficiently precise. He closed his eyes as he lowered himself, and when they opened again, they were the color of a dark idea. "Mr. Quinlan," he said, his voice the low rumble of a well-fed organ. "You are, I believe, of Eagleman, Phelps, and Quinlan." Quinlan inclined his head. "I am. You have represented the Langan family and contested matters twice in the past 8 years." Wolfe's lids drooped. He does not smirk, but he isn't above suggesting the possibility. Your reputation for caution is provincial, but steady. Quinlan managed to look gratified and insulted at once, which is a legal skill. "I'm here as private counsel to Miss Mendez." "Then you have either obscene confidence or excessive charity." Wolfe folded his hands on the dome of his middle. "Which?" "A little of both," Quinlan said. "Miss Mendez is innocent of any theft. I'm convinced of it." "You are convinced on the grounds of—" "The grounds that she is incapable of such a thing," he said, and before Wolfe could snort, he added, "and the grounds that the timeline is unfavorable to any clandestine opportunity." Wolfe didn't snort. He inched closer to it than most men would dare. Mr. Goodwin, beer." I pushed my chair back, rang the bell, and Fritz arrived with a tray that could have calmed a civil war. Wolfe inspected the bottle, the temperature, the glass, and the color like a magistrate with a weather license. He poured in a slow curve that would have made a geometry teacher feel seen. "Proceed," he told Quinlan. "Mrs. Langan died on Sunday," Quinlan said. "The funeral was Wednesday morning at St. Teresa's. After the service, the family returned to the townhouse on East 74th for the reception. Miss Mendez remained to assist. At approximately 3:30, Mr. Conrad Langen discovered that a letter was missing from the library desk. He accused Miss Mendez based on his wife's observation of her opening that drawer on a different day. When Miss Mendez laughed, Pilar flinched. "It wasn't a laugh," she said. It was—" She pressed her lips together, then forced them apart. "Sometimes when I'm very nervous, and I'm not supposed to make a sound, it comes out like that. Not happy. More like it catches." "A stifled, hysterical response," Wolfe said. "A tick. Mr. Quinlan, what of the letter's significance?" "The family is vexed that I ask," Quinlan replied. "But the late Mrs. Langen was an exhaustive archivist of her own life. If she kept the letter, it had weight. It was addressed from someone she called S. Mr. Conrad claims it was his mother's oldest friend, a person he never met. The content is unknown. The family was palpably more upset about its loss than even I expected." He exhaled. "They dismissed Miss Mendez on the spot. I protested. I made inquiries. The housekeeper, Mrs. Squires, suggested Miss Mendez had been indiscreet with Mr. Conrad when he came late from the office, which is slanderous nonsense. In short, Miss Mendez is impugned beyond a mere firing." Wolfe allowed that to hang in the air until it developed a patina. Then he redirected. "Miss Mendez, how old are you?" 25. "Why did you take the position?" "Because it paid well," she said honestly. "I was sending money to my mother." "Where?" "Newark," he grunted. "How frequently were you in the library?" "Every morning except Sunday." She swallowed. "Dusting. The housekeeper watches. She's very exact." "Does she watch everyone as effectively?" "No, only the girls. She is, I don't know the word. When she looks, you feel smaller." "I'm acquainted with the type," Wolfe said dryly, and glanced at me for confirmation of our continued employment under such scrutiny. This laughter. "Do you know its trigger?" "When I think I will cry and I must not," she said. "Or when I'm ashamed of being watched." Quinlan shifted. "You see, Mr. Wolfe, it was entirely involuntary." Wolfe sipped, finished, and set the glass with the solidity of punctuation. "I see that your client has been tossed aside and her character used as tinder for family comfort. I also see you intend to hire me to demonstrate her innocence to a household accustomed to its own certainties. You, Mr. Quinlan, have worked often enough with the Langens to know where the bodies, metaphorically, are stored." He let his lids lower, which on him is almost affectionate. "Why are you here and not there?" Quinlan's reserve twitched. "Because I like to win, Mr. Wolfe, and because any win here must be undeniable." I kept my face straight. "You learn not to grin every time someone volunteers. Their ambitions." Wolfe, however, prefers his clients to put their vanity on the table with the cutlery. "Fees," Wolfe said, and the business of civilization resumed. We arranged the terms in numbers that would keep Fritz in butter and Wolfe in beer. Quinlan did not argue. Miss Mendez watched the figures with a pained amazement that suggested she had never seen files that totaled that many zeros, unless it was the last page of a sweeping machine manual. When we were done, Wolfe shifted. "I do not connive," he said, "with households. Mr. Goodwin will investigate discreetly. If the letter is not recoverable, I will require the falsehood to be identified and dismantled." Quinlan nodded. "That is precisely why." Wolfe raised a finger. "And I do not chase ghosts. If the letter never existed, then we have been engaged to repair a social embarrassment. That is tiresome work." "I saw it," Pilar said, suddenly warm with insistence. "The day before the funeral. The envelope was thick in cream paper. There was an old stamp, and the handwriting was like someone expected the letters to fight back. Mrs. Langen had put a ribbon around it. Pink." Wolfe's eyes pinched, a minuscule gesture that, in that face, is a trumpet. "A ribbon?" "Yes," Pilar said. "It was silly, but she did it." Wolfe nodded once, just once, and I watched something invisible click into place behind his gaze, like a shelf sliding home. "Very well," he said. "Mr. Goodwin, see Mr. Quinlan and Miss Mendez out. Return when you have obtained from them the names of the household staff, their responsibilities, ages, and any relatives they like to boast about. Also the funeral program, if any, and the names of those who spoke at the reception." Quinlan rose. "You mean to start with their talk?" "I mean to start where people expose themselves most, public sorrow," Wolfe said. "At funerals, vanity goes unmasked. The bereaved speak for themselves and against themselves." He looked at Pilar. "Your laughter was untimely, perhaps cruel in sound, but the cruelty of others is always punctual. We shall see which punctuality was decisive." When they were gone, dispatched with the efficiency of a kitchen closing between courses, I shut the door and leaned against it long enough to qualify as furniture. "All right," I said. "You don't take bruised maids, wrongfully accused as a house specialty. We're usually a little higher up the food chain." "Piffle," Wolfe said. "Wrongful accusation is not a rung on a ladder. It is a condition. Also," he tilted his head, "Mrs. Langan, I've met her twice. Once in the company of a competitor who thought he had charmed her. He had, but only into granting him the privilege of a dignified loss. Once at a dinner where she argued that a business cannot be moral, but only managed. I disliked it and admired her." "And the laugh?" "The mind abhors a vacuum," Hida said. "A laugh in the wrong room draws blame like a glass, draws dust. But the letter—" He wiggled a finger, contemplating nothing and everything. "A ribbon, vanity again." I went to my desk and pulled a fresh pad. "You think the ribbon matters?" "Everything matters," he said, which from Wolfe is not a platitude but an operating manual. "But some things matter early. A ribbon suggests curation. Someone wanted it to be an object, not merely a message. That is either sentiment, which is suspicious in old Titans, or strategy." I wrote in my neatest hand that still pleases no one. "Find, staff list, funeral program, who spoke, who drank, who watched, who resented." Then I added, "ribbon, performance." Wolfe closed his eyes, not to dismiss me, but to retreat into those compartments he arranges like a beekeeper. "You will go tonight," he said. "Quinlan will have paved an entry." "Tonight," I agreed. "Shall I wear black and pretend to be a sympathy card?" "You will wear what assures access without notice," he said, "and you will attend to anyone called S. Should the name surface, bite it." "Woof," I said. He made a small sound that might have been approval in a different climate. "Also," he added, "the housekeeper, Mrs. Squires, exacts. Observe her. An exacting person often cannot bear others' control of minutiae. If the letter was curated, if it had a ribbon, she would itch to tie it tighter. And if she didn't, then she will itch to say why," he said. "And we will listen." I went for my hat and my coat, both of which had seen richer evenings. Fritz intercepted me with a sandwich that could have served as a guarantee on a small loan and a look that in another household would have been a sermon. I ate half and pocketed the rest, to keep the wolf from the door. We already had Wolfe, who is worse when he's hungry. At the threshold, Wolfe spoke without opening his eyes. "Archie. Present. Laughter at a funeral. Do not let it beguile you into mannerly conclusions. It may be that our client's irreverence is the only honesty we'll find. Attend to that." "Yes, sir," I said. "I'll try not to giggle." "Prig," he murmured, and folded his hands like a mountain agreeing to nightfall. Outside, the November air had the bite of a dog who had paid his license and was determined to get his value. I flagged a cab and gave the driver the 74th Street address. As we slid into traffic, I thought about a letter with a pink ribbon sitting in a drawer like a swan on a dark lake, then not sitting, not anywhere. People don't tie ribbons around things they mean to forget. They do it when they want a future witness. What I didn't know yet was who the witness was supposed to be or why the audience had turned ugly. But I know when a stage has been set. And if there's anything Wolfe enjoys besides orchids and butter, it's an audience that thinks it's the show. The cab dropped me at 74th, just shy of 8, and the block looked like it had dressed in black tie for grief and forgotten to change afterward. The Langen townhouse rose against the lamps like an illustration in a history book that made you wish the author had lived in your neighborhood. Big, symmetrical, and with a front door that discouraged handshakes. The kind of place that wanted you to know money had lived there so long it was on the census. Quinlan had phoned ahead to smooth the welcome, though smooth is relative when the household has already voted you villain. Still, the butler, or the man pretending, opened the door before I knocked, and though his spine carried more starch than his collar, he let me in. His eyes gave me the once-over like he was deciding whether to offer the menu or the broom. Inside, the house smelled of furniture polish and faint perfume of the kind that clings to rugs longer than the people who wore it. He led me past portraits large enough to cover municipal debt, down a hallway that muttered about heritage, and deposited me in the library. If I'd been planning to filch a letter myself, I'd have picked that room too. It had atmosphere, shelves groaning under serious bindings, green-shaded lamps, and a walnut desk wide enough for a small card game. Conrad Langen was waiting, which I expected, and his wife joined him, which I didn't. Conrad looked like the kind of man who had always been measured by his mother's yardstick and still hadn't reached the line. 40, paunch softening at the middle, hair holding out against the retreat. Expression that would have been handsome if it hadn't been rehearsed too often in mirrors. His wife, Clarissa, was a different cut, tall, blonde, slim, wearing her black dress like an advertisement for grief that had taken the high road. Quinlan had said the family was sore, but this was more than sore. This was bruised pride looking for someone's hide. "You're Mr. Goodwin," Conrad said, the way a man says, "You're the plumber after 3 leaks." "That's right," I told him, "working on behalf of Miss Mendez." His mouth pinched. Clarissa's chin went up like she was giving me permission to breathe her air. "She sent you here?" "She didn't send me," I said. "Mr. Wolfe sent me. He likes to know where his clients stand before he tells them to sit." That got me a flicker from Conrad, who had heard the name and respected it, even if it stuck in his throat. He gestured at a chair. I took it, mostly because standing would have made me look ready to leave, and I wasn't done yet. "The letter," I said. "Why don't you walk me through it?" Conrad's eyes narrowed, but he leaned back. It was a letter my mother kept for decades, from someone called S. She told me once it was from an old friend. That's all. After the funeral, I went to the desk to look at it. It was gone. Pilar had been seen at that desk. No one else had reason. "You're sure it existed?" I asked. His cheeks colored. "I read part of it once when I was young. My mother caught me and was furious, but I remember the paper. Creamstock, heavy, handwriting with a slant. It spoke of choices she had made." "That's all I recall," Clarissa cut in. "It wasn't just gone." Pilar laughed when Conrad accused her, laughed at his mother's funeral. "Do you know what that means?" "Maybe," I said, "but you're hoping I'll tell you." Her glare could have frozen soup. Conrad took her hand like he was afraid she might throw it. "I need names," I told them. "The household staff, who was in and out of this room. Anyone who knew about the letter. And I'll want the funeral program." "Why?" Clarissa demanded. "Because funerals are like cocktail parties," I said. "Everyone shows what they want and a little of what they don't. Mr. Wolfe likes to read the program like it's a cast list." Conrad hesitated, then rang for the butler, who reappeared as if he'd been rehearsing. I got the names. Mrs. Squires, the housekeeper, 2 maids, both young, one Polish, one Irish, plus a chauffeur and a cook. All of them had been at the reception, some more visible than others. Conrad handed me a program, too. St. Teresa's on 44th, with the hymns, scripture, and speakers neatly printed. I slipped it into my pocket and leaned back. Tell me about Mrs. Squires. Efficient, Conrad said. Very precise. Clarissa added, she's protective of the household, sometimes too protective. That matched what Pilar had told us. An exacting woman, one who liked to arrange the world into corners and dust it twice. If a ribbon had been tied, she'd either tightened it or resented not having the chance. I stood, thanked them with a politeness they didn't return, and let the butler escort me out before my welcome expired. On the sidewalk I paused under the lamps and chewed the end of a cigarette I didn't light. Something was itching already. If the letter had been missing since before the funeral, why was Conrad only noticing afterward? And why the theatrics with Pilar, unless they needed a scapegoat to direct suspicion away from someone closer? I cabbed it back downtown, and by the time I hit the brownstone, Wolfe was planted where I'd left him, as if the chair had grown him. He opened his eyes when I came in. Well? I laid out the interview, Conrad's account, Clarissa's disdain, the program, the staff list. Wolfe listened, lips pursed, and didn't move except to signal Fritz for more beer. When I finished, he tapped the rim of his glass. Did they volunteer anything of the letter's content? Conrad said he read part of it as a boy, choices she had made, whatever that means. And the housekeeper. Still sounds like a hawk with a duster. Wolfe grunted. Good. Tomorrow you will speak with her. Begin with her vanity. A woman who exacts does so because she fears disorder. If the letter was disordered, she will betray it. Do not press. Let her swell. Right, I said. And tonight? Tonight, Wolfe said. You will think. You will recall the program and consider who spoke, what they chose to emphasize. In grief, a family declares its alliances. Write it down. I will compare it against the names Miss Mendez remembers. I spread the program on the desk. The speakers were Conrad himself, a reverend, a family friend named Alicia Brooke, and a Mr. Harvey Grieve, introduced as long-time business associate. Wolfe read it without touching it, his eyes narrowing. Mr. Grieve, he said softly. That name is not unfamiliar. He served as negotiator in a merger 20 years ago. A shrewd man, but unctuous. Note him. I noted. Wolfe closed his eyes again. Archie, the laughter. Attend to it. Miss Mendez may have supplied us with more than she intended. A nervous tick, yes. But also a signal. Her shame comes when she is watched. Who was watching? I thought back to Clarissa's version. She said Pilar laughed when Conrad accused her. Maybe she laughed because Clarissa was staring too hard. Perhaps, Wolfe murmured. Or perhaps she laughed because she knew something and feared to betray it. His lids lifted and his gaze landed heavy. We must decide which. Tomorrow, Mrs. Squires. That ended my evening. Wolfe dismissed me like a priest closing the book, and I went upstairs to my room with the program folded in my pocket. But I couldn't help picturing Pilar in black, sitting at the back of the funeral, trying not to laugh at the wrong moment and doing it anyway. People condemn nervous tics as disrespect. Wolfe had been right. It might be the only honest sound in the whole room. I wrote out the names, the staff, the speakers, the bits Conrad and Clarissa had let slip. And as I turned in, I kept circling back to the same thought. Whoever tied a ribbon around that letter had meant it to be looked at, which begged the question, why hide it at all? That was the kind of riddle Wolfe liked best, and the kind that had me setting the alarm earlier than usual. Because tomorrow I had a date with a housekeeper who measured her life in corners dusted, and I wanted to be on my toes when I met her. Morning came gray and stingy, as if the city had decided to ration out daylight for better neighborhoods. I was on the street before Wolfe's orchids had finished their breakfast, armed with my hat, coat, and the household list Conrad had surrendered under pressure. My target was Mrs. Squires, the exacting housekeeper who had probably been running the Langan townhouse like a private kingdom for decades. People like that don't like strangers sniffing around their territory, which is why Wolfe had sent me instead of attending himself. He knows how to make a woman talk without lifting a finger, but when it comes to the sort who guard dust motes with their lives, I'm better suited. I can disarm them with charm, or at least make them believe they're still in charge while they're spilling what I need. The butler who answered the door this time looked sourer than a green apple, and clearly not thrilled to see me again. But Quinlan had paved the road, so I got inside and was marched back to the kitchen quarters like a trespasser being handed over to the sheriff. Mrs. Squires was there, all right, short, square, and stiff as a new broom. Her iron-gray hair was pulled so tight it must have filed a complaint with her scalp. She was peeling potatoes with the kind of precision you usually see in a surgeon. She didn't stop peeling when I walked in. She didn't even look up. "So you're the detective," she said, and the word detective sounded like a diagnosis. "I'm the detective's assistant," I corrected, "but don't let the title fool you. I've been known to handle a potato in my day, though not with your style. That peel's thinner than a politician's promise." She gave me a side glance, weighing whether to swat me away or allow me a chair. After a pause, she jerked her chin at the stool by the counter. I took it. "You've come about Pilar," she said. "That's right," I told her. "We're looking to clear her name. You've been here long enough to know when somebody's guilty and when they're just unlucky. Which do you think she was?" Her mouth tightened. "Unlucky and foolish. Laughing at a funeral." She sliced another potato. "But guilt? No. That girl couldn't keep a secret if it was stitched to her tongue." "Yet you didn't defend her when Conrad made his accusation," I said. Her hands stopped. The knife hovered over the potato. "It wasn't my place." "Maybe not," I allowed. "But it's your house, in a way. You run it. You know who touches what, who sneaks a smoke in the pantry, who leaves a scuff on the stairs. You mean to tell me you didn't notice anything about that letter?" Her jaw worked, grinding her teeth. Then she set the knife down and folded her arms. "I noticed too much, Mr. Goodwin. That letter should never have been kept. Mrs. Langan was a proud woman, but she had blind spots. She tied a ribbon around it as if that would make it less dangerous. That perked me up." "Dangerous how?" "I don't read private papers," she said sharply, though her eyes slid away. "But I know handwriting when I see it. That letter was from a man, not a friend. More than a friend. Old history. Mrs. Langan kept it all these years. And if Mr. Conrad had half a brain, he'd realize it could ruin him if it got out." I leaned forward. "Ruin him? Or the whole family?" She sniffed. "All of them. The Langans trade on respectability. You've seen their name in the papers. Philanthropy, business deals, grand dinners. They can't afford scandal, and that letter smelled like scandal." I thought about Pilar describing the pink ribbon, and Wolfe's observation that ribbons are about curation. Someone had wanted that letter preserved, cherished even. But now it was missing, and Mrs. Squires was hinting that the family might have wanted it gone long before Pilar ever came near it. "You think someone in the family took it?" I asked. Her knife resumed its work. "I don't think, I know, but it isn't my business to say which one." "Mrs. Squires," I said gently. "It became your business the minute they accused a girl who had nothing to do with it. Pilar's future is in ashes right now because you kept quiet." "That sits well with you?" Her lips pressed together. Then she dropped the knife onto the counter with a clatter. "It wasn't Pilar. It wasn't any of the servants. If you want the truth, look at Mrs. Clarissa. She's the one who fussed most about the drawer. She's the one who said she saw Pilar opening it. But I remember that morning, Clarissa herself was in the library before the girl even came down. Looking around like she was hunting something. Maybe she found it. That was a hot one, and I tucked it away quick. Clarissa, the poised widow-in-law, might have been doing more than mourning." "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" I asked. She gave me the stare of a woman who's kept houses longer than I've been alive. Because I know my place. But I also know fairness, Mr. Goodwin. If you mean to clear Pilar, don't stop at the servants' quarters. Look upstairs. I left her with her potatoes and a grudging respect for her spine. Out on the street the air bit harder than before, but I was warmed by the lead she'd handed me. Clarissa had been in that library. Maybe she'd been the last one to touch the letter, ribbon and all. Back at the brown stone, Wolfe listened with his eyes half closed, nodding once at the mention of Mrs. Squire's theory. When I finished, he opened them and fixed me with a look heavy enough to sink a ferry. "Clarissa," he said. Of course, vanity again. She would resent the letter most. A dead matriarch's old passion, preserved under ribbon, threatening the sanctity of her marriage's dynasty. Yes, she would resent it, and she would act. "Then why pin it on Pilar?" I asked. "Because she was convenient," Wolfe said. The laugh at the funeral gave them a scapegoat. People accept a scapegoat gladly, Mr. Goodwin. It spares them from recognizing themselves. "So what's next?" "You will interview Mr. Harvey Grieve," he said, "the business associate who spoke at the funeral. He may have known the true nature of that letter, perhaps even its author, and if Mrs. Clarissa has tampered, he will betray it by his silence or his eagerness. And if he doesn't, then we shall invite him here," Wolfe said, closing his eyes again. "Along with the rest, this matter will end in my office, with the letter or without it. But first, we test the circle. Go to Grieve, Archie. Listen to what he does not wish to say." I picked up my hat. "And if he doesn't want to talk at all?" Wolfe's lips twitched, the closest he comes to a smile. "Then you will make him. It is, after all, your métier." That was my cue. Fritz handed me a sandwich and a look that said he didn't trust businessmen any further than his frying pan. I headed out again, already planning my approach. If Grieve was part of the past Mrs. Langan had tied up with a ribbon, I meant to tug until it unraveled. Harvey Grieve's office was 3 floors above a bank that wore columns like epaulets and below a law firm that preferred its names in gold leaf. The receptionist looked at my hat as if it might be contagious and informed me Mr. Grieve was in a meeting that would not end in this lifetime. I told her I was happy to wait and that waiting was my hobby. Subcategory: men who like to be important in rooms with glass doors. 3 minutes later, the meeting let out, having discovered that some doors still require hinges. Grieve came toward me wearing a suit that had never been surprised and a face that had. He was the sort who had learned to smile by being told that it was profitable. 60, give or take the concessions of lighting, handsome along the axis that measures jaw against ego. He offered a hand like a notarized document, and I took it, because I'm a patriotic citizen. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I've heard of you. To what do I owe the interruption?" "A funeral," I said, "and a letter." If he flinched, he did it on a schedule. The smile did its duty. Thurza, a magnificent woman. We were close associates. The eulogy was the least I could offer. "It was good," I told him. "Pious, but not perfumed. You mentioned the honesty of her choices. That line had a ring to it." He tilted his head, inviting himself to be modest. Thurza liked to joke that business is merely the arithmetic of appetite. Honesty is choosing which appetite you'll be punished for. "That's catchy," I said, "almost as catchy as a pink ribbon around an old letter." Now he blinked. He didn't sit. He perched on the edge of his desk like he meant to spring. I don't know what that refers to. "Sure," I said. "That's why you just moved half an inch farther from the file drawer. It's the muscle memory of men who prefer a lever. Relax. I'm not here to snatch anything. I'm here because the Langan household fired a maid for a theft she didn't commit, and you're one of the few people who might know why a letter was worth a public scene." He let the smile fail. It improved him. "Mr. Goodwin, discretion is the only binding contract left. If I speak to you, I betray a woman who is dead. If I don't, I abandon a woman who is living. I find neither choice decorative. Decorations are for Christmas, I said. This is about cause and effect. Did you know the author? He looked past me at the city doing its noon impersonation. I knew the initials. One letter, I said. S. Yes. He said it like a weight, not a consonant. Who? He shook his head. Not mine to give. Was he alive? I asked. When you met Thurza? Greaves' hand went to the blotter, flattened it. He was. Long ago, he was brilliant, undisciplined, inconveniently married, and not to Thurza. She was the same, minus the marriage. He met my eyes. You see the arithmetic. Was there a child? I asked, because math sooner or later demands it. He didn't gasp. He stilled. No. There was a business. The letter concerned terms, personal terms, by which she ended that business. It was written when she was young enough to hope that feelings could be recorded without becoming liabilities. Why keep it? I asked. Because she enjoyed her trophies, he said simply. And because I suspect she sometimes needed to reread the proof that she had once chosen against herself. That would be like Thurza, a woman who permitted herself admiration in the key of self-censure. It also set the ribbon in relief. A curate's knot on a confession. Who else knew? I said. In the house. Conrad knew it existed, he said. He asked about it years ago. Clarissa did not understand it and therefore hated it. Others may have guessed. He hesitated. The letter was not the only thing people have mistaken about Thurza. How did you learn the initial? I asked. She told me, he said, and the past sat between us like furniture. Once, in a moment of generosity, she wanted me to know that she had not always been a machine. I chose a different angle. At the reception, after the funeral, where were you? In the drawing room, he said. Then briefly in the library, when Conrad asked me whether we ought to open some of the decanters his mother had hoarded since the Carter administration. Was the letter there? I did not look for it, he said. I have not looked for it in 20 years. But you stepped into the library, I said. Who was in it? Clarissa passed through. The butler hovered. Mrs. Squires was a shadow at the door. I remember the Irish maid, Kate, bringing a tray and pretending not to hear the family argue about the choice of music. He rubbed his temple. You do not need me for a list. I need you for motive, I said. If that letter threatened anyone, who stood to gain most by its vanishing? Clarissa, he said, by a mile. It represented a narrative that did not feature her. She believes that history should begin when she enters a room. And Conrad. Conrad feared it, Graver said. Not for what it said about his mother, but for what it said about him, that the woman who made him also made choices without him. He has a child's terror of being optional. Does he drink? I asked. Only when encouraged, Graves said dryly. He married encouragement. Could either of them have had a duplicate made? I asked. A copy to hold while destroying the original. That would require imagination, he said. Clarissa has willpower instead. Conrad has neither. I let that sit. We had circled the letter without landing. Time to change altitude. Who is S? I asked again, soft this time. I can promise that Mr. Wolfe will not publish it. He will use it only to force a confession into daylight, and only if daylight refuses to come on its own. If we fail, a girl's life is a small price to the family's convenience. He closed his eyes. Damn you, he said, which was the first fully human thing he had offered. When he opened them, they were clear. Samuel Rook. The name meant something, faintly. A financier who had once ridden 3 companies into a canyon and come out with a new horse. Clever, unscrupulous, elegant. Dead, if my memory hadn't misplaced a headline. Rook, I said. Bird and chessmen. Yes, he said. Thurza liked the double joke. He died 8 years ago. The letter would not injure him. Only her legacy, I said, and her son's composure, and Clarissa's belief that the past owes her a tip. He exhaled. If I have betrayed Thurza, I will send a note to the grave. Send flowers, I said. The grave has no mailbox. On the sidewalk, I called Wolfe from a pay phone because the city is a museum of antiquities and some of them still work. He answered on the second ring with a tone he reserves for interruptions that might be edible. Rook, I said. Samuel. S as in regret. Grave placed Clarissa in the library Prepillar. Mrs. Squires corroborates. Grave thinks Clarissa hated the letter on principle and Conrad feared it on instinct. Humph, Wolfe said. And you? I think Clarissa is our hands. Conrad is our mouth. Grave is our memory, and Mrs. Squires is our conscience with starch. What we lack is the letter, or proof of its fate. We will require neither if the instruments are tuned, he said. Return. Bring Grieve if attainable. I will also require Mrs. Squires, Miss Kate, and Mr. Conrad with his wife. If they decline, you will apply your repertoire. You're staging the overture, I said. Phooey, he said. I am arranging chairs. The overture wrote itself the moment Miss Mendez laughed. I collected Grieve by the elbow with just enough courtesy to make it voluntary and phoned the townhouse. The butler tried to develop laryngitis on the spot, but I applied Quinlan's name like iodine, and he recovered in time to agree that the family could be present at 6. Mrs. Squires was fetched by the promise that we meant to be fair. Kate, the Irish maid, required only the assurance that she would not be alone with anyone named Langan. Back at the brownstone, Fritz had taken the office's temperature up with a pot of coffee that would have stood its ground in a riot. Grave sat on the red leather as if it might ask questions. Wolfe regarded him without warmth or hostility, which is his charity. You have done a disservice to a dead woman, Wolfe told him, and a service to a living one. You may count the balance as it pleases you. Sit. We had an hour. Wolfe used it to think and pretend not to, which is his version of loading a gun. At 5:58, the bell announced a quorum of vanity. Clarissa entered like a verdict, Conrad like a deflated appeal. Mrs. Squires came with her apron removed, but her authority intact. Kate came last and stood near the door as if she meant to run after agreeing to stay. I closed the door, and the room took a breath it would not release until Wolfe told it to. He did not rise. He let the silence fatten. Thank you for attending, he said at last. A letter has been used as cudgel and screen. We will put it down. Clarissa's chin lifted. If this is about that maid, it is about you, Wolfe said, and about honesty, which your mother-in-law prized in a peculiar way. Sit, Mrs. Langan. She sat, not by choice, because gravity had been informed that she had no further business on her feet. Wolfe glanced at me. Mr. Goodwin, the drawer. I nodded, crossed to my desk, and opened the top right drawer, where I had placed something Fritz found in our wastebasket an hour earlier that had no rightful business there unless someone with delicate fingers and a poor sense of trespass had been in our office while I collected our guests. I lifted it out and held it by its throat, a pale pink ribbon, creased where it had been tied and untied too often. Someone has been nervous, Wolfe said softly, and clumsy. Mrs. Langan, do you prefer to begin? Clarissa's mouth shaped a no before sound arrived. Her eyes flicked to Conrad, then to Greve, then to the door, measuring the odds that fresh air could double as absolution. I held the ribbon where everyone could see it. It wasn't much. A pale strip with memory creased into it, but it did the work of a witness who never misremembers. That's absurd, Clarissa said, finding her voice and staffing it with frost. I've never seen that thing. You have, Wolfe said, amiably deadly, and you handled it this afternoon. Mr. Goodwin? I didn't sit. I wanted the angle. At 4:20, a caller used the area entrance and asked Fritz if Mr. Wolfe would see her. Fritz told her to return at 6 with the others. She left. After she left, Fritz emptied the basket by my desk and discovered that he did not put it there. Mr. Wolfe did not. I did not. Fritz can vouch that no one else entered before I returned with Mr. Grieve. Every head pivoted toward Kate, who had gone pale enough to match the ribbon's ghost. She was small, but tough, the kind of tough that grows in cramped hallways and thin shoes, her hands twisted together like they meant to wring something only she could see. Wolfe didn't look at her. He kept his gaze on Clarissa and made his voice lazy. Mrs. Langan, we can proceed in 2 modes. One is painless but requires honesty, of which your household has had a famine. The other is laborious. I dislike labor. They didn't, Clarissa began, then shut the door on whatever sentence might have helped her. Kate, Wolfe said at last, turning his eyes. Why did you bring that into my office? She swallowed. I didn't bring it on purpose. On purpose, he murmured. That implies the presence of purpose. Her eyes flashed a plea at Mrs. Squires, who sat as straight as a line drawn by a schoolmistress. Mrs. Squires gave her a single, tight nod, the kind you give a girl before an injection. Kate wet her lips. Mrs. Clarissa sent me, she said. Earlier, not long after lunch. She said I was to come here before 6 to see if the detective had the letter. I didn't want to. She glanced at me, embarrassed by her own cowardice. But she said she'd tell Mr. Conrad I was insolent and I'd be sacked. So I came. Fritz told me to return later. The ribbon, I had it in my pocket because I was scared to have it on me in that house. I threw it away her. Conrad jerked like someone had tugged a string tied to his collarbone. Clarissa's face stayed arranged, but you could see the pins beginning to bite. Wolfe lifted his chin a fraction. Where did you acquire it? Kate stared at the ribbon, as if it might answer for her. From the library floor. After Mrs. Clarissa took the letter, the morning of the funeral reception. She told me to bring her the old envelope from the desk, the one with the pink bow. I fetched it. She went upstairs with it. Later, in her room, she pulled off the ribbon, put the papers in a brown envelope like a bill, and told me to burn the ribbon and the old envelope in the kitchen stove because we are not living in a museum. I went to the kitchen, but Mrs. Squires was there, and I didn't want questions. I shoved the ribbon in my pocket, and then with everything that happened, Mr. Conrad shouting, Miss Pilar, crying, I forgot it was there. Until Mrs. Clarissa said I must come here, I thought if the detective had the letter, the ribbon would show. Would show. She ran out of road. That you had assisted a theft, Wolfe finished, not cruel, merely exact. He shifted the weight of his gaze to Clarissa. Madam? Clarissa sat very straight. I was tidying, she said. A letter is not a shrine. I transferred it to a sensible folder and put it with family papers. I meant to give it to my husband to keep with his mother's legal documents. That is all? Grieve made a small, rueful sound that might have been a laugh if it had been braver. Wolfe ignored him. And then, he said, between that practicality and your husband's gratitude, the letter vanished. Conrad's voice came out thin. How do you... Because you created a public fuss about its absence after the service, Wolfe said. If you possessed it, you would have staged no pageant. You would have produced it soon enough to humiliate Miss Mendez privately, where household sport is traditional. Instead, you needed a scapegoat on the spot. Mrs. Squires clasped her hands tighter, the knuckles polished. He accused the girl first because Mrs. Clarissa was frightened, she said, flat as a report. She came to me before the accusation and asked if anyone had been in her room. Clarissa wheeled. I asked because I sensed disarray. One of you was careless. One of us, Mrs. Squires said, was exact. Wolfe made a minute. Please noise. The chronology is graceless but clear. At noon, Mrs. Clarissa obtained the letter from the library, removed its ribbon, and placed the contents in a new envelope. She intended to control it, either to destroy later at leisure or to keep as private leverage against a memory. She secured it poorly. Vanity makes careless clerks. By mid-afternoon it was gone from her custody. At 3:30, Mr. Conrad discovered its absence from the desk where he expected to find it because he didn't know his wife had migrated it upstairs. In the flurry of shame and temper that followed, Miss Mendez's nervous laughter provided you with a ready scapegoat, and you obligingly stoned her. He let his lids drop. It is cheap melodrama. It is not truth. Conrad's hands opened and shut. If she moved it, he pointed at Clarissa, then faltered at his own rudeness. Then who took it from her room? Not me. I never went in there. Not without knocking, Clarissa said, sharp with injured rank. Greaves' voice was mild. You have a dressing room with a separate door. She shot him a look that could strip paint. You seem very familiar with our floor plan. I know houses, he said, and vanities. Yours in particular. Kate blurted. The door sticks. You have to lift when you turn. Only Mrs. Clarissa and me and Mrs. Squires know the trick. And Mr. Conrad? Wolfe asked. She shook her head. He never uses it. Mrs. Squires, to her credit, didn't allow smugness. I checked the rooms before and after guests. That afternoon I did not go into Mrs. Clarissa's room between luncheon and the accusation. I was on the sideboard. I did not leave. So, Wolfe said, that leaves Miss Kate and— I didn't, Kate said, fierce and surprised by her own volume. And anyone you, Mrs. Clarissa, permitted, Wolfe continued unruffled, to enter under your authority. A maid from the inn, a florist perhaps, a sympathetic friend, a messenger, or you, Mr. Grieve. Grieve did not blink. I wasn't invited upstairs. The dead tolerate many things, but household protocol is not among them. Wolfe's head tilted. No. But you, Mr. Conrad, entertained the idiocy that the letter could be in my office. Idiocy seldom travels alone. It had a companion. Anxiety. You were afraid that if the letter existed anywhere outside your control, it would teach you something about your mother that would make your spine go water. So you sent the girl here to reconnoiter, platitudinous and obvious, but not decisive. Conrad stared at the carpet like it might suggest lines. I don't know what you expect me to say. I expect you to find your memory, Wolfe said. You recall who entered your wife's room. You will testify or you will be handled. Clarissa's calm frayed. This is intolerable. You have no authority. I have exactly the authority you conceded when you came, Wolfe said. Also the kind that proceeds from attention. I've paid attention to you. It confers jurisdiction. He gestured me to the drawer again. I produced a second item Fritz had rescued, a slender flake of grey caught in the wastebasket mesh, curled like a comma burned from paper. I laid it next to the ribbon. I'm not a chemist, Wolfe said, but ash is ash. That is from cheap bond, not thick stock. Someone burned the envelope, but not the letter. Haste or sentimentality or a calculation about appearances. Clarissa's eyes shuttered. I told the girl to burn the old envelope. It was a ridiculous affectation. Indeed, Wolfe said. And after you had modernized the presentation, someone else modernized possession. Who? Silence vibrated. Kate's breath hitched. Mrs. Squire's jaw set. Greaves' mouth twitched at a private theorem. Conrad lifted his head and, to his credit, tried. Harvey, he said, hoarse. You were in the house. You could have— I did not, Greaves said almost kindly. I would have returned it to the fire and rescued you from your own spectacle. Then it must have been— Conrad bit down on the name as if teeth could keep it from existing. Wolfe said it for him? Alicia Brooke, the family friend who spoke at the service. She has keys to your sympathies and to your rooms. She admires, she comforts, she tidies. She is also, I think, a sentimentalist of the worst sort, a curator of other people's dignity. She would have believed herself authorized to relieve you of a burden. Clarissa sat very still, and now I saw it. Not guilt, not exactly. Rage at having been outmaneuvered by someone she could not risk scorning in public. Mrs. Squires exhaled like steam escaping a kettle. Kate looked confused and hopeful in the same breath. Wolfe let the silence work again, kneading the room like dough. "We will have her here," he said at last. "Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Panzer will fetch her. Tonight." He closed his eyes. "There has been enough make-believe. We will finish the play." Saul made it in 20 minutes, which for New York and human nature is a personal best. He didn't bring Alicia Brooke in handcuffs. He ushered her as if he were guiding a widow from a pew. That was right for her type. She had the practiced grace of a woman who knows where chairs belong and makes people believe they chose to sit there. 50, give or skirmish. Dark hair alert to the first hint of gray, a face trained by sympathy into usefulness. She took in the room, Clarissa rigid, Conrad damp, Grev composed, Mrs. Squires upright, Kate knotted, and decided she was needed by all of us. She aimed at Wolfe and stopped 5 feet short, as if an old instinct advised against testing the air too close to a mountain. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "you sent for me. If this is about the unpleasantness after the service, I'm here to help." "The impulse does you credit," Wolfe said. "The execution may not." Her eyes flicked to the ribbon on my desk, the ash curl and back. She folded her hands. "Then say what you mean, and I'll say what is true." "Splendid," Wolfe murmured. "Truth first. You possessed the letter after Mrs. Clarissa had spirited it from the library. You removed it from her room and then decided its fate. Do you prefer to tell us where it is, or shall I require you to carry your handbag to Mr. Goodwin?" Her chin rose, and for a second the sympathy slipped, and we saw the steel. She didn't move the bag. "How did you decide that?" "By the simplest calculus," Wolfe said. "You are a custodian by temperament. All day you have been weighing what to save from other people's decisions. Clarissa removes a relic she cannot abide. She intends to destroy or to retain as a whip. You cannot permit that, not in her hands. You go upstairs via the dressing entrance you know, yes, and you extract. It satisfies your vanity of protection. It also allows you to rewrite the ending. The only question remaining is whether you chose to burn, to bury, or to bank." Alicia looked from him to Clarissa. "You reached into my room," Clarissa said, ice breaking into shards. That saved you," Alicia said, with a flash that suggested they had been trading small knives for years. The flash died. She turned back to Wolfe. "I will not give you the letter." "You will," Wolfe said, not moving, "or I will put the police to their proper use. Theft is vulgar. Extortion is worse. Choose the honesty you preach at others." Grave half laughed again, and it cost him. Alicia's fingers tightened on the bag. Whatever she carried had weight. "It isn't yours," Conrad said, surprising himself by sounding like a man. "It's mine." "It was never yours," Alicia shot back, and his courage went dim. She faced Wolfe. "You are wrong about one point. I did not go upstairs that afternoon. I went upstairs that morning, before the service, when I came to check that the flowers had been arranged as we intended. Clarissa was in her room. I asked after her. She was searching. She told me to mind the lilies. I told her to mind her temper. Then she left, and I saw what she had found. The envelope. I had known it existed for years. I took it. Clarissa made a sound that would have chipped porcelain. "You had no right." "I had the only right that mattered," Alicia said. "Thurza's trust. She asked me once if I would spare Conrad a certain knowledge when she was gone. She said she kept the letter for herself, as punishment and remembrance, but that she did not trust the appetites of the living. I told her I would spare him if I could." "Why not ask Grieve?" Wolfe asked. Alicia's gaze softened just briefly, and I saw the old triangle flare and go. Because he admired Thyrsa's courage more than her caution, she said, he would have advised revelation. I chose gentler surgery. Gentler, Wolfe repeated, as if sampling a sauce. So you took it, intending mercy. Mercy does not produce ash. Who burned the envelope? I did, she said, steady. Rituals matter. I could not bear that ribbon tied to anything but her memory. I removed it. I burned the wrappings. I carried the rest. And then, Wolfe said, you kept it. Why? To decide, she said quietly. To read it again and make sure its meaning was as I remembered. Was it? Grieve asked. She met his eye. It was kinder than I remembered, and worse. Wolfe flicked a glance at me. I did not need the signal. I stood and crossed to Alicia, with a hand open, not demanding, just near enough that etiquette could dress the seizure as surrender. She hugged the bag once, an old reflex, then set it in my palm and stepped back as if absolving herself of a sacrament. I returned to my desk and opened it. Inside were the usual artifacts of a life that leaves rooms neater than it finds them. A small mirror, a handkerchief, a rosary, a notebook whose corners had been educated into obedience, and at the bottom, under a flap, a manila envelope cut down to make an inner pocket. Within that, a sheaf of thick cream, folded flat and ribbonless. Wolfe didn't hold out a hand. He doesn't gloat with muscles. Read only the portion that concerns motive, he said. Do not give us the sentence that would make a butcher of a dead woman. Grave nodded once. Grave. Clarissa looked like a woman denied a window during a storm. Conrad stared at his future on the desk and could not summon the nerve to look. I slid free the top sheet. The handwriting bore down across the page like a cavalry charge restrained by practice. Samuel Rook, saying goodbye to a woman he could not afford and would not relinquish in memory. There were lines about mistakes that felt like triumphs and triumphs that felt like treason. And toward the end, a paragraph that did the work Wolfe wanted. Terms. Not of love, but of equity. He had surrendered a share in a textile concern in exchange for her departure. He had put it in writing. If that writing surfaced, it would not ruin her. It would recast her empire's origin as the dividend of an affair. I read it aloud, stripped of its purple, letting only the arithmetic stand. When I finished, the room lay still. So, Wolfe said, a letter that converts sentiment into asset. Mrs. Clarissa, your revulsion is intelligible. Mr. Conrad, your panic is ridiculous, but, like your chin, inherited. Miss Kate, your fear was common and forgivable. Mrs. Squires, your restraint has been upgraded to merit. Mr. Greve, your silence at last has been apt. And Miss Brooke, he inclined his head a fraction, your trespass was a sin of pride disguised as fidelity. Alicia's shoulders sank. I will accept that, she said. The world won't see the paragraph, Conrad said suddenly, voice frayed but firmer. It can be destroyed. Wolfe shook his head. No, you will not destroy the only honest artifact your mother preserved. You will return it to the keeping of the estate, sealed with a letter of explanation stating that its contents are not to be published or quoted during your lifetime. In exchange, you will provide restitution to Miss Mendez for slander and lost employment, and you will issue a statement absolving her. You will also elevate Mrs. Squires' salary by a sum that acknowledges the value of unspectacular integrity. Those are my terms. You can't dictate, Clarissa began. I am dictating, Wolfe said, because I am the only person in the room not lying to himself. If you decline, I notify the press that your household fired a woman to cover a family quarrel over an inheritance that isn't money. Choose. Graves' mouth curved. Take his terms, Conrad. They're cheap. Conrad's cheeks mottled, and then something like relief broke through. All right, he said. Yes, I'll do it. He turned to Alicia. You'll give it to me. I will give it to Mr. Grieve, she said, with enough bite to keep him honest. He will lodge it where Thurza used to lodge her bets on human nature. That will satisfy, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin will draft the notices for your signatures. Kate made a small sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. In our house, those are kin. Mrs. Squire's eyes shone briefly and then remembered themselves. Clarissa said nothing. Rage that cannot find a knife sometimes learns patience. I replaced the letter and closed the bag. The phone rang, a small, vulgar sound after all the ceremony. I picked it up. A male voice, hushed to secrecy, said, "Tell Mr. Wolfe he should check his door. Someone has been watching his brownstone since 4 o'clock, and not for flowers." Then the line went dead. I reported it. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Saul?" "I'll sweep," Saul said, already moving. Wolfe did not look at the door. He looked at the people we had gathered. "You see," he said, "vanity is not the only appetite that multiplies. We have woken another." He closed his eyes as if to draw up more chairs. "Very well. We will dine. And then we will ask why anyone outside this room cares about a letter that we have already buried." Saul went downstairs with the quiet he saves for crowded alleys. I edged the curtain and saw nothing but a coupé across the street, angling its nose at our stoop like it was reading the plaque. The driver was 2 colors darker than the upholstery, and had the posture of a man who prefers doors shut. I let the curtain fall. Wolfe's eyes were closed, which for him is a way of sharpening pencils. Fritz announced dinner as if nothing mortal had ever happened within 5 miles. We didn't send the guests to the dining room. The office table did duty, which put Clarissa in a crisis about napkins that died unannounced because Fritz's napkins are diplomacy with hems. The courses steadied the room. Food does what sermons try to. By the time we were down to coffee, Saul was back, and he carried the kind of report that doesn't spill. "License number belongs to a firm sedan," he told Wolfe. "Valcourt Investigations, West 49th. Driver is one Emile Dross. He was alone. No camera visible. He took a call at 4:10, parked at 4:40. He's still there." Wolfe's eyelids lifted a fraction. "Did you trifle with him?" "Not yet," Saul said. "I wanted Archie's timing." I took my hat. Clarissa rose 1/2 an inch. I pointed her back down with a smile. "No one leaves," Wolfe said mildly, which settled it. Saul and I went out the area door, slid around the block, and came up behind the coupe. Dross watched the glass. He had the bulky calm of a man who could wait out winter. I rapped the passenger window. He didn't start. He rolled it down 3 inches. "You're lost," he said. "Sure," I said. "We're all lost, but your car isn't. It's pointed at my employer's door. That's found. Who hired Valcourt?" He considered me like I was a new detergent. "Why would you think I'm on a job?" "Because your hat's wrong," I said. "And your jacket is right. Big enough for a camera you don't show and tight enough to hide a notebook. I'll take the notebook." He grinned, which improved him as much as cleanliness. "You're famous on 50th Street. "Flatter me later," I said, and put a palm on the glass. "Notebook." He slid it out of his inside pocket. I took it and flipped. The notes were blocks of uppercase with arrows. "Langen House. Letter. Rook. Equity swap. Call W. Susanin. Watch the brownstone." He had sketched our stoop badly and our window better. "Wade," I asked, and handed it to Saul. "As in the Susanin that comes after. Langen on the letterhead." "Wouldn't know," Dross said. "Guy said his name was Wade. I don't collect last names any more than tips." "What's the appetite?" I asked. "Publicity or leverage?" "Client said to take pictures if anyone from Langen came in," he said. "Said a column might be interested. He didn't tip me off about your sandwiches." "Who gave him our address?" I asked. "You," he said, cheerful. You and your face. You were tailed from 74th. I could believe that. The butler had dislike enough to light a path, or Clarissa had made a phone call on her way to my office trash. I kept my voice easy. Why would Wade care about a private detective's door? Because money likes to know if its enemies have had a bright idea, he said. You want me to move? I can circle the block. It'll give me exercise. Stay, I said. You'll be warmer soon. We left him and went back. Wolfe absorbed the notebook's handwriting without touching the paper. Graves' mouth took an angle that rich men use on new taxes. Conrad stared as if this were another subject he had failed to study. Clarissa's eyes narrowed to slits you could thread wire through. Susan in, Wolfe said. Of course. He would fear that the letter could be construed as an irregular origin of capital, or he would hope to use it to pry a share loose for himself. Either way, appetite disguised as prudence. Graves shrugged. Wade has the family talent for grudges and less of the talent for balance sheets. He's been needling Conrad for years. Conrad stirred. He's been needling my mother for years, he said, and made it sound like a confession of inherited failure. Wolfe's gaze traveled to Alicia. Did you telephone anyone from St. Teresa's florist today? She blinked. No. Someone did. A florist's assistant overheard the word letter in conjunction with Thurza, he said. That fact has been bought. The money likely wore a Susan-in ring. Mrs. Squires looked at Kate. Kate shook her head until her hair protested. I told nobody, she said. Good, Wolfe said. Then we confine ourselves to those who had reason and means. He let his eyes rest, heavy on Clarissa. Madam? She didn't flinch. I called Quinlan. He's our lawyer. I did not call a Susan-in. Quinlan did not call Wade, Wolfe said. He is cautious to a fault. Someone else in your household prefers sabers. He leaned back. No matter. We will feed Mr. Susan-in, not starve him. Mr. Goodwin, invite him. I phoned Valcourt, asked for Wade by first name, and got him with the second try, which tells you about his evenings. He answered with a voice that thought it was a verdict. I told him my name, told him he could park his operative in the living room where the heating functioned, and told him if he wanted the truth before his columnist did, he could come be educated. He accepted because men like Wade prefer their education in front of mirrors. We had 20 minutes. Wolfe used them like a chess clock. He set the letter in sight, but not in reach. He instructed Fritz to bring beer when the doorbell rang, and told Saul to be visible because men who hire watchers dislike being watched. He had me move the red chair by 1 foot, which in our office is like shifting the flag on a map. Wade Susan-in arrived with the outerwear of a fox and the face of a man who had taught himself his own importance. He looked around and saw names. He greeted Clarissa with the flat warmth of a family holiday and nodded at Conrad as if they shared a tutor he had outgrown. He ignored Alicia because she ignored him first. He smiled at Graves because Graves smiled like a magazine. I hear there's a letter, he said, and installed himself without invitation, and that it may concern the origin of certain holdings. That interests me. I like clean ledgers. You like ledgers that obey you, Graves said, pleasant as arsenic. That's different. Wade flicked him off his sleeve. Mr. Wolfe, you have something to show me. I have something to say to you, Wolfe said. You have pestered this family with your antiquated grievances. You have engaged a watcher to misinterpret shadows. You have kindness enough to sign your first name to other people's business. Sit. He sat. He had to. Wolfe's command took the gravity out from under the rest of us and loaned it to him. The letter is private, Wolfe said. It concerns a youthful transaction between the late Mrs. Langan and a man who no longer breathes. It does not grant you equity, leverage, or ghostly applause. What it does, if aired, is alter a paragraph in a history that your name happens to share. History will survive the alteration. Your dignity might not. Wade's nostrils flared. Are you threatening me, sir? I'm saving you, Wolfe said, from humiliating yourself in public with a story that will end with you explaining why you trailed a servant to a detective's office to manufacture a scandal out of a ribbon. He flicked a hand. Spare me euphemism. Did Thirza steal her start from Samuel Rook? No, Wolfe said. She purchased her departure with a relinquishment he put in writing. You will not see it. You will accept that it exists, that it exonerates no one of appetite, and that it condemns no one but those who would wield it. If you bray, you will be answered. If you slink, you will be ignored. Wade looked at Conrad. You'll let him speak for you? Conrad met his eyes, and to everyone's surprise found a beam. Yes, he said. For once we'll let the grown-up speak. Clarissa's mouth tightened, but she didn't contradict him. Alicia's shoulders eased. Mrs. Squires looked at the carpet and permitted a micron of satisfaction. Wolfe went on, the words smooth, the edges not. You may, if you like, bring your columnist. I will seat him and hand him coffee, and then make him wish he had remained in Ruma. Or you may go home and write in your ledger. Vanity debit, sense credit. Choose before your watcher freezes. Wade said a word suitable for January. You think you can hide this forever? Documents surface. Not when they are stewarded by competence, Wolfe said. Mr. Grieve will see to that. He has presided over more inconvenient papers than you have presided over lunches. Grave inclined his head. It wasn't modesty. It was inventory. Wade stood. Saul did too, without standing, which is a trick he has. Wade decided retreat was strategy and aimed at the door. He stopped there and said to Clarissa, You could have called me. Family first. She didn't look at him. I did, she said. It just wasn't you. He left. The room sighed. Wolfe placed his fingertips together. We have concluded the exterior nuisance, he said. The interior one remains. I do not like to be used even by good intentions. Miss Brooke, you carried a secret you should have carried to me at once. Mrs. Langan, you sent a girl to my door with a trinket and hoped I would dance. Mr. Langan, you allowed your fear to invent a thief. All of that will be corrected. Tonight you will compose your apologies. Tomorrow Mr. Goodwin will supervise their delivery. And then you will leave my house and not return until summoned. No one argued. It was not that they agreed, it was that disagreeing would have required a version of themselves they hadn't brought. Fritz brought beer for Wolfe and tea for the rest of us, and shortbread for Kate, who did not deserve her day and had it anyway. Saul signaled from the hall that the coupe had driven off. I sat, finally, because the room had stopped pretending it was a court and become merely our office again, large enough for dignity and small enough for truth. Wolfe drank. He set the glass down and sighed, a bass note of completion. Now, he said, we attempt to learn why Miss Mendez laughed. He opened his eyes on Alicia. Because that is the only part of this still sharp enough to cut. Alicia didn't blink. She knew a summons when it wore her name. You think her laughter wasn't contempt? I think it was a signal, Wolfe said. Archie. I was already at the phone. Quinlan had been sensible enough to keep Pilar nearby. 10 minutes later the bell rang again, and Fritz ushered her in with the caution of a man bringing a sparrow into a room full of portraits. Pilar stood just inside the threshold, coat folded over one arm, eyes circling the carpet like it might tell her where to place her feet. She saw Clarissa and shrank. She saw Alicia and steadied. She saw the ribbon on my desk and flushed the color of its ghost. It's all right, I told her, and for once I meant it in the literal sense. Sit there. Mr. Wolfe has a question. Just one. She perched on the edge of the red chair as if it might accuse her of upholstery. Wolfe didn't make her wait. He knows when delay is cruelty. Miss Mendez, he said, when Mr. Langan accused you in the library, you laughed. Earlier, at the service, there was also a sound you stifled. You have told us it is a tic, a safety valve you do not control. That is true and incomplete. What did you see or know in those moments that your throat could not tell? Pilar's fingers clutched the coat. She looked at me like people do when they believe I can translate Wolfe into mercy. I nodded once. Yes, say it. She lifted her eyes to Wolfe, found no anger there, and let the words come. At the church, she said, voice thin but accurate. When Mrs. Brooks spoke, she said Mrs. Langan was brave because she chose not to take what she could have. People made the sound people make when they like a sentence. But I know. She swallowed. I know she did take something. Not money. Decisions. She took them away from other people without telling. She took even her own past and tied it up like a box. I saw. It made me want to cry and laugh together. She pressed her lips to stop the tremor. It sounded wrong in that room. And in the library, Wolfe prompted. Softer. In the library. Mr. Conrad shouted, she said. Her eyes skittered to him and away. He said I took the letter because I had opened the drawer last week. Mrs. Clarissa stood there. She was very white, but her hands were not. There was grey on her nails, like ash, and a smell, like burnt paper and perfume together. I knew she had burnt something. Then Mrs. Brooke came and stood beside me and told me not to be afraid. Pilar turned to Alicia, apology and gratitude braided. When she said that, a corner of paper was in her pocket. Cream, thick with the little watermark. The crown with the R. She moved her fingers as if tracing it. I had seen it before when I dusted the library. I knew the paper. I knew it was the same. Everyone was looking at me. I couldn't say it. I tried to swallow the sound so I wouldn't cry and make it worse. It came out wrong. She touched her throat as if to show us where her truth got stuck. It sounded like a laugh. No one moved. It wasn't just the content. It was the exactness. Clarissa's eyes dropped to her hands as if she could scrub time from them. Alicia took the indictment without flinch. She had already paid that bill. Conrad stared at Pilar with surprise that felt like shame learning vocabulary. Mrs. Squires closed her eyes briefly, a prayer for correct ledgers. Wolfe nodded, not as reward, but as acknowledgement of fact meeting its chair. You see, he said to the room, the only person in that house who observed honestly was the one you agreed to call impertinent. Her body protested in the only register left to it. We are done discussing her character. Pilar's chin trembled. Do I have to? You will not apologize to anyone, Wolfe said. They will apologize to you, Mr. Langan. Conrad didn't try to stand. Miss Mendez, he said, hoarse and plain. I'm sorry. I believed what was easiest. That's sometimes been my habit. I'll pay for what I did to you and make it known that you did nothing wrong. You will do more than make it known, Wolfe said. You will be specific. Names and actions correct slanders. Euphemisms repeat them. Conrad nodded like a man instructed by a firm teacher who finally believes the subject exists. Clarissa's mouth pressed into the shape of a refusal and then lost interest in dignity. I'm sorry, she said. The words were carved, not poured. I did not mean to injure you. I meant to. She stopped because the verbs available to her had all aged badly. I did not mean to make you small. You failed then, Wolfe said dryly. She did not shrink. She saw more than you and told less. Mrs. Brooke. Alicia had already turned toward Pilar. I used you to hide my own trespass, she said. I told myself it protected them. That was a lie. I wanted to be the one to decide. I'm sorry. I will say so in public. Pilar, faced with the odd spectacle of people who could buy cities apologizing to a woman who takes the subway, nodded and looked down, color high again, but for once not from shame. Wolfe sipped his beer and set it aside. Business resumed. Mr. Goodwin, telephone Mr. Quinlan after our guests depart. He will meet Miss Mendez at 11 tomorrow. draft the statements, and arrange for a settlement sufficient to substitute for 2 years' employment, referenced with premium for defamation. He will also supervise a quiet placement for Miss Mendez in a household where precision is not cruelty. On it, I said. Miss Mendez, Wolfe went on, you will accept the settlement not because money balances harm, but because households do not understand virtue in any other coin. He leaned back, eyes half closed, speaking to her and through her. You will not mistake their apology for grace. It is a transaction. Take it and be free. She nodded again, this time with something like relief. Thank you. Do not thank me, he said. You performed the only exact act anyone did in that room. You noticed. He flicked 2 fingers. In Wolfe, that is almost a benediction. Fritz will see you out. When she had gone, taking with her the last gust of the tempest, Wolfe turned his head half an inch toward Saul. The sedan? Gone, Saul said from the hall. Valcourt peeled off after Wade. If they publish, it won't be tonight. It won't be at all, Grieve said, taking custody of the manila as if it had weight enough to correct his posture. I'll see to that. You will, Wolfe said. And you will remember that secrecy is only respectable when it protects the unambitious. Otherwise, it is vanity in evening dress. Grave accepted the sting as men do who like the man wielding it. Clarissa rose. Her anger had cooled into something more dangerous. Discipline. We are dismissed? You are, Wolfe said. Return when your letters are signed. They filed out like a parade that had lost its band. Mrs. Squires paused at the threshold and met my eye with the ghost of a smile that could have been approval or only the settling of inventory. Kate slipped after her, 2 cookies from Fritz's saucer hidden in her palm like a vote for the future. The door closed. The house exhaled. I sat, finally, and loosened my tie, which had done no wrong. Is that it? I asked. Or is there another watcher in an umbrella stand waiting to prove he knows our names? Pooh, Wolfe said, but amiably. There is always another watcher. Tonight he can watch the rain. He closed his eyes, then opened them to consider me. The laugh, Archie. You will remember it the next time someone tells you that good form is synonymous with good faith. I've always suspected as much, I said. But it's nice when your suspicions bring sandwiches. He tasted his beer, nodded approval at Fritz by osmosis, and settled deeper. Human vainglory, he said, more to the ceiling than to me, prefers artifacts to acts. A ribbon around paper, a phrase around a memory, a posture around a grievance. Miss Mendez's sound offended because it had no ribbon. It was naked truth, and they clothed it in contempt. That's a speech, I told him. Should I take it down for the ages? Leave the ages their own troubles. He shut his eyes. Call Quinlan, then go to bed. Tomorrow you will shepherd signatures, and I will address Mr. Wade's columnist if Wade proves an idiot. After that, we will eat sausages. Which is justice of a kind, I said, and reached for the phone. By the time I had Quinlan updated and the desk squared, Wolfe had done his final transformation of the night into sculpture. I turned out the light, left the office to the hum that means we haven't lost, and climbed for my room. On the landing I stopped, thinking of Pilar's hands knotted in her coat, the way her laugh had sat between grief and knowledge and been mistaken for insult. People are always telling you what sounds are appropriate where. Houses like the Langens make a religion of it. But the city has its own liturgy, and sometimes it sneaks into a library and knocks the silver off its coasters. I slept with that in my head and woke with it still there. It turns out that of all the noises you can make in this town, the rarest is honesty. If you happen to hear it, don't shush it. Or if you must, shush your own reflex to call it rude. Wolfe would put it better. He already had. Morning didn't bother with ceremony. It smacked the window and kept moving. Wolfe was in the plant rooms, which meant I had 2 hours to corral the living. I phoned Quinlan, who sounded like a man grateful his client's crisis had chosen the narrow road where fees are plentiful and disasters small. We set 11 o'clock for Pilar. Then I called Grave to confirm he was babysitting the envelope until he could bury it in a vault whose combination he'd forget on principle. He promised me a receipt written in a hand that had never crossed its own T's wrong. After that, I rang the Langen townhouse and asked for Clarissa. She came on with a tone that had iron filings in it. I gave her the wording Wolfe wanted for the apology and the settlement. She adjusted 2 adjectives to make Dignity feel consulted and agreed to meet us at Quinlan's office at noon. Conrad, in the background, said yes in a voice that made me think he'd been practicing the syllable overnight. Pilar arrived at our door 10 minutes early, which is how innocence operates when it's got subway schedules memorized. Fritz parked her in the front room with tea that could have forgiven a multitude of employers. I told her we'd walked to Quinlan's. She looked like she wanted to rehearse saying, "Your Honor." I said not to worry. The only robes in sight would be on a receptionist's chair. When Wolfe came down, I put the plan on his desk. He listened while extracting the temperature of his beer from a glance. "Attend to exactitude," he said. "They will attempt euphemism. You will swat." Quinlan's office was done in dark wood, the kind that earns interest just by existing. He took Pilar into a conference room with windows that pretended not to spy on Midtown. Clarissa and Conrad arrived together, he with his tie straight for once, she with a face that had decided the day would be endured and, if possible, remembered with edits. Alicia came uninvited 5 minutes later, which I didn't contest. Penitent witnesses are useful ballast. Grieve was there too, depositing the manila to the temporary care of a safe the size of a conscientious coffin. I won't spoil your morning with legal recitative. The gist, a check for 2 years' wages plus a cushion fat enough to be called respect. A signed statement from Conrad, naming dates and rooms and retracting the accusation without the usual if and misunderstanding that lawyers paste on remorse. A letter from Clarissa to the agency that had placed Pilar, vouching her as careful, honest, and suitable for trust in rooms where private papers are kept. Quinlan had drafted it as, "in all circumstances," but I suggested the version that would cut where the insult had been applied. To her credit, yes, even the exacting get ledger entries on the right side, Clarissa signed without chewing the pen. Pilar watched her name appear on those sheets like a ship sees water after rocks. When it was done, she stood, shook Conrad's hand because she is built that way, and nodded at Clarissa. Alicia hugged her with the competence of a woman who has been efficiently contrite before. Grave offered 2 contacts for employment, neither of which sounded like houses where laughter would be misfiled. We left with copies and an appointment for the agency at 2. Pilar walked beside me as if our sidewalk had been paved by someone whose day had redeemed itself 1 line at a time. Back at the brownstone, Saul was at my desk, paging through a newspaper with the attention of a man who counts teeth before he fights. "Wade didn't plant it," he told me. His columnist filed a blind item and had it spiked by an editor who likes getting paid. Grieve's shadow made calls last night. "Good," I said. I brought souvenirs. I stacked the statements in Wolfe's in-tray, which is my favorite in-tray, not because it's tidy, but because paper placed there emerges, by some alchemy of adiposity and accuracy, as resolution. Wolfe read the language, corrected 1 comma, and nodded. "Adequate," he said, which, translated, is praise. At 2, I took Pilar to the agency. The director was a woman named Miss Hapgood, who had the posture of a metronome and a face that had survived the Depression by outweighting it. She read the Langen letter, raised an eyebrow that could have cut string, and told Pilar she'd have an interview at 4 with a couple on Gramercy Park whose sole vice was books. Pilar looked at me. I told her books seldom accuse anyone at funerals. She smiled. Small but present, and for the first time since she'd knocked on our door, the tremor wasn't there. When I got back, there was a visitor who had not phoned ahead because he knew he'd be refused if he did. The columnist himself, a thin man upholstered in gabardine and curiosity, with a name that sells papers and a handshake that sells friends. He wanted a quote. Wolfe obliged him with one of those paragraphs that sound like a compliment until you put it to bed and check the wallet. "There is no story," he said, "unless you wish to write about a household that chose to be just when convenience invited them to be ordinary." The man laughed like a man who knows he won't get paid for writing about justice. He left with nothing, which is a new experience for him and a reliable tonic. By late afternoon, my legs suspected I was double-billed. I filed an expense for what they'd endured. Wolfe approved it with a glance that said I might live. The phone rang at 5. Miss Hapgood. Pilar had the job. The Gramercy couple had liked her eyes and her dusting, not in that order. They didn't own a ribbon. I took that as augury. I told Wolfe. He grunted in the key of agreeable. Dinner reset the world to edible. After, with coffee steaming like old men's opinions, Wolfe tilted his head at a slant that meant we had reached the lecture portion. "Vanity," he began, "is not cured by humiliation. It is merely redirected. The danger now is that everyone involved will recast themselves as protagonist. We must preclude it." "We have statements," I said. "They'll try to embroider, but the cloth is fixed." "Embroidery is insidious," he said. "We will shear it with succinctness. Tomorrow you will deliver copies to the parish office at St. Teresa's and to the florist. Gossip grows in shops." "You're thinking of the assistant who overheard," I said. "I'm thinking of ecosystems," he said. "A rumor is a weed that enjoys masonry. One must salt the cracks." At 7, the bell rang again. Mrs. Squires, hat-pin surgical, stood on our stoop with Kate 2 steps behind and a box under her arm. They didn't belong to evening calls, which is precisely why they came. Gratitude outruns category. In the office, Mrs. Squires set the box on my desk. Inside was a tin of biscuits that could have soothed a dog bite and a folded note on plain paper. It said, in a hand trained by lists, "Exactness is kindness when applied to people. Thank you for requiring it." Kate had drawn, with undiplomatic pencil, a ribbon tied neatly and then crossed out. I showed Wolfe. He allowed his mouth the smallest upward concession. When they left, the house resumed its shape. I stood at the window and watched the street behave. You'd think drama would change pavement. It doesn't. It changes shoulders. Mine felt lighter, which is a cheap metaphor and had the virtue of precision. Behind me, Wolfe sighed the long sigh that files the day as finished. "Attend, Archie," he said. "Tomorrow brings no visitors. We will honor silence with sausage." "Gladly," I said, "if the world insists." He closed his eyes, which meant the world would oblige. I put the biscuits in the cupboard, the statements in the safe, and myself on a path to bed that didn't stop at reflection. I was midway up the stairs when the phone rang one more time, the note that tells you the universe doesn't respect curtain calls. I went back. It was Pilar. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, breathless in a way that turned the line into a hallway. "They have a library too, the new place. The man said it is messy and not to be made neat. I told him I would dust but not arrange." "Perfect," I said. "That's policy." "And," she added, with a small, careful courage, "I laughed when the lady told me I would have Sundays free. I told her I laugh when I'm happy and when I am afraid. She said she would learn the difference." "Good," I said again. "We will too." I hung up and turned to tell Wolfe the punchline, but he had already written it on his face and filed it. Morning kept its promise and did not send callers. That suited Wolfe, who prefers victories to cool. After the orchids, he came down, glanced at the safe, and told me to salt the cracks. I took 2 envelopes, the statements, and headed for St. Teresa's. The parish office smelled of wax and calendars. A young priest read Conrad's retraction, nodded and said, "There was talk." I told him the talk could rest and left him a copy for the bulletin board. The florist was next. The assistant who had overheard leaned on the counter. I showed her the statement. She folded it carefully. "I'll tell Mrs. Anselmo and the delivery boys," she said. "They talk in stairwells." Back at the brownstone, a note from Grieve waited, brief and exact. The letter was lodged beyond avarice, to be opened only under the instructions we drafted. He permitted one sentence. Thurza would have called this infuriating and correct, and placed his initials like a seal. Quinlan's cable followed. Funds cleared, letters sent, placement confirmed. He allowed, "I admit satisfaction." Saul dropped by to return a key he hadn't borrowed. "Valcour's car hasn't circled," he reported. "Wade's column is a recipe for turkey stuffing. Either he blinked or he's saving face." I told Saul he could carve either bird. Fritz announced sausages with the solemnity that makes complaint a theological error. Wolfe ate as if appetite were moral when exercised precisely. By dessert, he had forgiven humanity enough to permit coffee. I briefed him on the priest and the florist, Grieve's vault, Quinlan's deposit. He listened, lids at half-mast, and then opened them enough to let reason back into daylight. "Good," he said. "Accuracy has been distributed to places that cultivate inaccuracy. We will leave it to propagate. One more errand for completion, rather than drama. I phoned the Langjen townhouse and asked for Mrs. Squires. When she came on, I told her, plain and measurable, that the agency letter had been delivered and that Miss Mendez would not lack for Sundays. She permitted a breath that might have been satisfaction invading discipline. "Then we will repeat it to anyone who needs the story," she said. "In the pantry, if necessary." Wolfe reclined. That suggested a short lecture. It wasn't. "Consider," he said, "how appetites clothe themselves as ethics. Clarissa's for control, Conrad's for absolution, Alicia's for significance, Wade's for advantage." Only one sound went naked. The laugh. It offended because it belonged to the body, not the plot. "Shall I stitch that on napkins?" I asked. "On your hide," he said. "It will save you errands." At 3, the bell offered a coda. Alicia Brooks stood on our stoop with a bouquet not from Anselmo's. She asked to see Wolfe. He allowed it. She set the flowers on the side table. "I came to say I did not enjoy being right," she said, "but I prefer it to being foolish." "You were both," Wolfe said. "And you have paid." She accepted that. "Conrad told me he intends to read the letter someday," she added. "I told him waiting can be cowardice. He said waiting can be love." She smiled without much mirth. "Which of us is right?" "Both again," Wolfe said. "The trick is to know when the coin changes hands." When she had gone, I walked to the newsstand. The headline concerned a senator's itinerary, which is the press's way of saying nothing happened. The blind item that almost was, wasn't. I brought back a paper and a pretzel. Wolfe took the paper and left the pretzel. Evening restored ritual. The orchids had had theirs. We had ours. I sat with a book good enough to be read twice and bad enough that no one would ask to borrow it. Wolfe dozed. The phone rang. Miss Hapgood. She laughed. She said crisply, "I believed it this time." I told her belief, like dust, lands where it's welcome. At 9, Wolfe decided to conclude. He lifted himself with the care of a man who knows the value of leverage and looked at the empty glass. "Archie, sir, do not forget that what we rescued was not a letter. It was a house. We restored it to habitability by removing an ornament and naming the drafts." "I'll put that in the brochure," I said. He went on. "There are fewer satisfactions than people think. Today we acquired one of the legitimate ones, insisting that accuracy is the beginning of mercy. You may quote me." "That will fit on a napkin," I said, and meant it. He closed his eyes. "Turn out the light." I did. The office took back its shadows. The ribbon sat in the drawer where we had placed it, not as a relic, but as a reminder. Outside, the street behaved like streets do. Indifferent, useful, full of people learning which sounds to smother and which to free. I locked up, checked the bolts, and headed upstairs. On the landing, I stopped because habit told me to, and listened. You hear things in that house if you let it instruct you. The faint respiration of orchids, the argument of pipes, the city rehearsing its excuses, my own feet conceding to the day. Somewhere in Gramercy, a small tick of laughter had been recognized and not reprimanded. In 74th Street's library, dust resumed its negotiations with wood. In our office, a man who detests being moved had moved what needed moving without leaving his chair. That is not justice in the operatic sense, but it is the kind Wolfe accepts as part of dinner. Me too. I went to bed, the kind of tired that doesn't require a ribbon. The city kept on, which is its most persuasive moral. And if there was one last sound before sleep, it was Wolfe's voice from earlier, still working, accuracy as mercy. That and the faintest echo of a laugh that had finally been given the right room. It was enough for us and for the city. Tonight, anyway. The case didn't end with fireworks. It ended the way Wolfe likes things to end, with order restored, appetites labeled, and the brownstone no longer disturbed by strangers who rearrange his air. By the second evening, the orchids had their caretaker back. Fritz had resumed scolding sources instead of visitors, and Saul had gone on to whatever alley needed him next. The Langans sent their signed letters by courier, neatly folded in envelopes embossed with dignity, which amused Wolfe more than he admitted. Clarissa's was cold as porcelain, but accurate. Conrad's, to his credit, had the tremor of a man who had written his own words instead of hiring them. Alicia Brooks sent a note as well, apologizing again in a hand that leaned backward as though trying to leave the page. Wolfe read it once, grunted, and dropped it into the drawer where such relics hibernate. Pilar's voice over the telephone had changed. Less hesitant, less brittle. She described the Gramercy Park Library as a chaos of books and dust, and how the mistress had laughed when Pilar told her she could not bear to tie ribbons around paper. "Then don't," the mistress said. That, Wolfe remarked, was the nearest thing to justice, liberty not to repeat another's follies. The newspapers gave us nothing. Wade Susanin had either discovered self-preservation or been made to discover it. His blind item never surfaced. If he sulked, he did it out of print, which is where sulks belong. Greve kept the letter sealed, promising that Conrad could open it only when he was willing to accept the arithmetic of his mother's youth. Wolfe said nothing, which meant he approved of Greve's stewardship even while detesting the impulse that made such stewardship necessary. On the third evening, I found Wolfe with the ribbon in his hand. He was not sentimental. He was evaluating. He turned it once, set it back in the drawer, and spoke without looking at me. People tie ribbons because they cannot bear the nakedness of memory. They clothe it as if cloth could quiet its teeth. But laughter, true laughter, refuses ribbon. That is why they condemned it. It left them without a costume. I said, "You've dressed the case well enough. Even the neighbors would call it decent." He frowned. "Decency is not an end. It is a corridor. One may walk through it toward honesty or toward convenience." "Pilar got honesty," I said. "The Langans got convenience. Seems balanced." "Not balanced," Wolfe corrected. "Conjoined. The girl's honesty forced their convenience to admit itself. That is resolution." He leaned back, lids drooping, the mountain resettled. "Archie, mark it well. Whenever laughter is treated as insult, listen. It may be truth straining its leash." I left him with his beer and the orchids waiting upstairs. The brownstone was quiet again, which is Wolfe's justice and my relief. Cases that end without corpses are rarer than they should be. But this one had managed it, leaving only a ribbon in a drawer and a lesson Wolfe would quote whenever the world mistook noise for disrespect. And if you want the very end, it came at dinner 2 nights later. Fritz served a trout that had died nobly in butter, and Wolfe, halfway through, remarked, "It is not the dead who endanger us, Archie. It is the living with their ribbons." I said, "Then here's to laughter, which doesn't tie knots." He gave me a look that was almost approving, and that was the final word, which is the only kind he allows.